Hey there, YouTubers! You know, a long time ago, somebody told me the expression, you drive for show, but you putt for dough. What does that mean? Well, when you're out on the golf course, you make these big, bombing 300-yard drives, but golf tournaments are really won by a couple of inches of putting here or there, and the same is true of chess. Yes, it is totally fun to learn opening traps and to win the game in 8 moves, but most of the time, it's going to come down to the end game, and today we're going to start a big ol' super-sized YouTube series on how to convert winning endgame advantages, and also sometimes how to hold the draw. Okay, now take a look at our first example. We've got a queen and a rook. Black has nothing because we're going to be a little bit mean to black today, okay? Black's only going to get a king. We're going to learn how to win when you have various advantages, especially with big pieces like queens and rooks. Okay, let's get rid of all the red on the screen. Let's take a look how our little queen and rook are going to work together. So, our rook can first start by moving up to the square b2. Sometimes, in our examples today, you want to give a direct check, but sometimes you want to be a little bit more clever. What we're going to do is we're going to stop on the second rank, and that prevents the black king from being able to ever move down the chessboard. You can see I've drawn that arrow, and there's a force field. If the king tries to go down, zap, he has to go back because you can't put your king in chess. Now, all black can really do is move side to side, and when the king does, now we are going to start our series of checks. We're going to move the queen to the third rank. And really, it's just that simple. The rook is going to go up to the fourth, the queen's going to go up to the fifth, and I like to call it climbing a ladder, because when you climb a ladder, you use your right hand, then your left hand, then your right hand. If you try to use your right hand twice, well, that would be a very strange ladder climbing technique. Okay, now the king's in check. Remember, he can't go to the second rank. We got all those squares covered, so he's got to move up the chessboard. And even if he approaches our pieces, because the queen is such a powerful lady, it doesn't matter, because we could just move the rook, and the rook has the protection of the queen. The king has to move up the chessboard, then we move the queen. Left hand, left hand, and yeah, you can see how easy this pattern is. The king moves up, the rook gives a check. Even if the king runs away, then the queen moves up. The king finally gets to the top of the chessboard, but oh no, he's out of room. Rook to b8, and you can see our computer has helped us out by announcing checkmate, because if the king tries to go to the square d9, yeah, that's not possible. Error, cannot compute. All right, that's the simplest example. Practice it once or twice, and then you've probably got it for life. Moving on, what if we don't have our queen? What if we have 2 rooks? Well, in this situation, the ladder climbing technique still works, but sometimes you have to switch ladders because the rook's not being as powerful as the queen. Sometimes you actually could lose a rook if you're not careful. Okay, so in our first example, what we're going to do is we're going to move our rook up to the second rank. Now, for all of you absolute superstar future grandmasters in waiting, you probably actually could give a check, but that's a little bit of an advanced technique because the king could now walk down the chessboard. I would rather us just move the rook up and learn the basic way. But if you know a more advanced way, tell all your friends, okay? Because, you know, make them smarter too. Now, the king, again, can't go down. Error. The king can go sideways. Okay, now this rook, who's just sitting at home, he's our left hand. He's going to move up to the third rank. Now the black king can start approaching our rooks. Now, we have a problem. Let's take a little pause. Let's sit on our hands, as my chess coach used to tell me. No, he was not being mean to me, and no, I was not in trouble. He was trying to get me to be careful before I reached out and grabbed a piece. If we continue our plan, and we play rook to b4, the king is going to be able to capture our rook, something he was not able to do when that was a queen, because the queen was defending. But the rooks don't really defend each other here, so it is possible to lose a rook. Now, that's the bad news. The good news is you can still win with a king and a rook. Now, the bad news is I haven't taught you how. The good news is stick around till the end of the video, because we are going to learn how to win with a king and a rook. Let's go back, though. Ideally, we would like to not lose our rooks. So what we're going to have to do here is switch our rooks to the other side of the board. We're going to make a ladder on the opposite side of the board. And I don't know why I switch accents there. Let's move the rook all the way over to the square h2. Now the king might attack this rook. This rook is going to join his friend in battle, but we don't want to move the rook all the way to h3 because now the rooks are stacked on top of each other, and if you try climbing a ladder with your hands stacked on top of each other, you might lose your balance. So let's put the rook on the square g3, and now we got our left hand, we got our right hand, and when the king moves, we can continue our pattern on the other side. Rook to h4, the king has to move up the board, Rook to g5. The king moves up again. He's getting close to us. Rook to h6. King moves up again. Uh-oh. If we play rook up to g7, we will lose our rook. So let's swing this rook all the way to the other side. And when the king moves all the way to the other side, but not quite, we don't want our hands on top of each other. And when the king moves, now our left hand moves up. And in this case, the right hand to the black king. Oh, wait a minute. We've already done golf. Now we're doing boxing? No, we're doing chess. That is checkmate. The king's in danger. The rook, of course, cuts off the king's escape. And I see no moves for black, which means it's time to move on. What happens if we only have a queen? Well, in this case, for the first time, we are also going to need our king's help, but not at first, okay? Pretend your king's not there. Of course he is there, but he's going to take a little rest while the queen does most of the initial work. Okay, here's what I want you to do. I want you to first move your queen exactly a knight's jump away from the black king. Now, in this first example, there's actually many ways you could do it. If the queen moves to f3, she would be exactly a knight's jump away. 1, 2, turn. The queen could also go to the square d3, and she would be a knight's jump away. 1, 2, turn. And for you eagle-eyed YouTubers, even the square d7 would work. 1, 2, turn. However, because this is a video and we have to get moving and grooving, we're just going to pick one. We're going to pick the square queen to d3. And by the way, I now have a bit of a history in ChessKid of missing queen moves. Yes, for those of you yelling at your screen right now, I did forget about g4. Okay, you're welcome to write to us, but I did correct my mistake here. 1, 2, turn, and that would also work. But we're just going to pick one. We're going to pick the square d3. And the queen has made an invisible fence around the black king. The queen's attacking all the squares on the d file. She's also attacking all the squares on the third rank. And if we count the edges of the chessboard, the king is now stuck inside that fence or that force field for the rest of the game. And what we're going to do is we're going to slowly make this fence smaller and smaller until the king ends up in the doghouse and has almost no squares to move. The king, when he moves up 1, the way to make the fence smaller is to move the queen to d4. And look at that. The queen is still exactly a knight's jump away. Notice we do not put the king in check. If I back up and instead I give check, I know it's super tempting because in our last example, in the ladder checkmate, we made a lot of checks. But in this example, we're not really going to give check until the very end when we give checkmate. If we give check here, then when the king moves, we still have our fence. I'm going to draw it for you. Unfortunately, that king is no longer inside the fence. Now, he is inside another fence, but we're not doing super duper grandmaster ideas just yet. Let's go back to the basics. Let's play the queen to the square d4. There is our knight's jump. Now, when the king moves, we're just going to keep following him. If the king moves 1 square diagonally up to the right, guess what? Fun Master Mike's a broken record. The queen's going to move 1 square diagonally up to the right. Exactly. Now, for those of you who play Simon Says in school, this is basically a game of Simon Says. Simon Says move diagonally down 1 square to the right. The queen moves diagonally down 1 square to the right. Even if I forget to say Simon Says, I still want you to do it, okay? And look at how small the fence is getting. The fence goes up, it goes sideways, it goes up, and it goes sideways, and the king is stuck inside. When the king moves up 1, the queen moves up 1. When the king moves diagonal, the queen moves diagonal. When the king moves up 1, you can actually follow him 1 more time. And now, when the king touches the corner of the board, danger, danger, fireworks going off on the screen. Do not follow the king any further, because if you do, it will be stalemate because the king will have nowhere to go. If we follow this king 1 more time, the king is not in check and he has nowhere to move safely, and there's no other pieces on the board, and it's his turn. All of the qualities are met for stalemate, which is a tie. And if you're white, you don't want a tie. You want the full point. You want to win this game. So when the king touches the corner, that's the cue for your own king to walk in the play and be a part of this checkmate. The king can just move up, and the black king has to move down, and the black king has to go back to the corner, and he has nowhere to go. He is a caged dog. The king moves up, the king moves up, the king moves back, and this king has just been pacing, waiting for the inevitable. Our king is now close enough to assist the queen, and the checkmate comes on the square G7. That checkmating square is one square diagonal from the corner. That is the most common checkmating square. And notice here, the queen needed the protection of her king all along, and the king can't capture our queen because stinky breath. Kings can never touch, and the queen attacks all of the possible escape squares. So that is a checkmate. So again, the pattern is queen, 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 king, 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 queen for the win and for the checkmate. Remember, do not check the black king until the very end when you give checkmate. There is one little trick I suppose I should show you for completeness. If we go all the way back to the position here, in this particular position, the king could go to the corner super early. And if he does that, don't follow him by going diagonally up to the right, because that will be stalemate. The correct move here is actually to go to G5 and give that king just a little bit of air to breathe, and then we can follow our same pattern from before. So do watch out for that trick in case your opponent tries it against you. In fact, a funny story about this. There is a famous trick on the internet where black walks into the corner hoping that you have pre-selected your move and you end up stalemating black. I'm not going to show you the trick, but just know, even the top players can sometimes confuse their opponents. Okay, let's move on and talk about why the king and queen checkmate is so important, and also to give you a real life example, because you know what? In that first example, I put the white king and the white queen on their starting squares, which is very unlikely in a real game that your king and queen would be on the starting squares. What's more likely to happen is you have an extra pawn at the end of the chess game. And remember, when pawns get to the other side, they can become queens. So let's have black chase your pawn, but the black king's a little bit too slow. We're going to go ahead and get a queen, and this is a little bit more of a real-life example because our queen and our king are on random squares on other sides of the chessboard, okay? Now, black's king is going to move. What we need to do here is to put our queen a knight's jump away. Now, you could totally follow the king. You could put your queen on b7, and the queen would be 1, 2, turn. There's a couple of problems with this move. First, the fence is quite large. Look at how giant the space is that the black king can roam around. You can still use my technique to win, but it's going to take a while. The other issue is that your own king is inside the fence, and at some point, that's actually going to become a little bit of a problem. Your king is going to get in the way of my technique. So, while this can be done, it's not recommended, unless, of course, again, you're a grandmaster. If you're a grandmaster watching the ChessKid YouTube channel, welcome. I don't know why you're here, but I'm glad you found us. Okay, let's go back. In this position, I want to move the queen a knight's jump away, and I also want our king to not quite be in the middle of the fence. So there's maybe one or two options here, maybe not exactly a knight's jump away, but I'm going to pick the square b3. I think that's the easiest. The queen is a knight's jump away. You can see the 1-2 turn. The fence is a little bit smaller. You're going to take my word for that. And most importantly, when I draw the fence, the white king is not inside the fence, so there can be no issues. Nothing that we have not talked about will come up. I think I just used a double negative there. Okay, but here we go. Simon says move up 1. Queen moves up 1. Simon says go diagonally to the right. Queen moves diagonally to the right. King moves diagonally to the right. Oh, I forgot to say Simon says. Doesn't matter. King moves up 1. Queen moves up 1. King moves diagonal. Queen moves diagonal. King moves diagonal. Queen moves diagonal. Uh-oh. Pause. We are going to do a little bit of math. Oh yeah, you probably didn't know it was coming, but we are. In this position, I can prove to you the box is getting smaller, the fence is getting smaller, because there are fewer squares inside the box, inside the fence, okay? So if you don't believe me, let me show you what I'm talking about. In this position, the top of the box is actually 4 squares if we include the queen, right? 1, 2, 3, and 4. And if we go to the right, we have 1, 2, 3. Now, for those superstar math people, you might know something called area. That's the size of the fence or the box, and that is length times width. 4 times 3, that should be 12. If you don't believe me, let's go ahead and color in all of the boxes. And there we go. Coloring in all the squares, that is, and we've got 12. Now, when the king moves diagonal and we follow the king, let's now count the squares or do the area, right? Okay, length times width. The length is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and the width is 1, 2. 5 times 2 is 10. So it went from 12 to 10. And that means that the fence or the box or the space is getting smaller, and that's what we want. You came for the chess. You stayed for the math. Hopefully you stayed for the math. Let's get on with our checkmate though. The king moves up. The queen moves up. The king touches the corner. Fireworks. Do not follow the king, or it will be stalemate. Instead, bring your own king in. And I would bring my king around to the left of the queen, right? I would go this way. I would not go that way. There's actually another stalemate you could accidentally walk into if you go to the right of the queen. So we're going to go to the left of the queen. We're going to keep on keeping on. The king is slow, but he gets the job done. And in this position, remember I told you, the checkmate is always one square from the corner. The king does not do anything. The queen touches that square, and it is a checkmate. It's like an arrow pointing to the black king. The queen checks the king. The king can't capture because of stinky breath. And we have ourselves a king and queen checkmate. I should mention that all the checkmates I've shown you so far, including the next one coming up, are practicable on the ChessKid website under the workouts section. So it's not good enough to just watch Fun Master Mike do this checkmate once or twice. What I want you to do is go to our workout section. I want you to practice it 5 or 10 or even 100 times. Okay, moving on to our last one. As promised, this is the hardest checkmate, but it's actually not too hard. What happens when you only have a rook remaining at the end of the game? Can you checkmate? Yes. Is the technique different? Yeah, a little bit. The main difference between the king and rook checkmate versus the king and queen checkmate is that the king and the rook need to work together. Remember, in the king and queen checkmate, the pattern was you move your queen a bunch of times, then you move your king a bunch of times, then the queen delivers the checkmate. That's not really going to be the case here. The king and rook need to work a little bit together to get this done. However, this does share one of the same techniques as the king and the queen checkmate. We're going to make a fence around the king, and the best first move is rook to h4. Yeah. And the rook attacks all the squares on the 4th rank, all the squares on the h file, and even though it's a giant fence, the black king is certainly inside it. Now, when the king moves, he might start chasing the rook. Here's the problem. The rook can be attacked, unlike the queen. You can see the king is coming for his dinner, but we're not going to let that happen. We're going to move our king closer because when our rook gets attacked, our king can run up the board and defend our rook. Remember, he can't take because 2 kings can't touch. And again, for those grandmasters that are watching, I know that you would actually play rook to e4 and you would make a different box. You would actually switch fences around the king, but we're not quite at that technique yet. So let's learn the basic technique, which is king to g3. Okay? Now, black's king has to move somewhere. Let's give him a move. Once your king and your rook are touching, the simple technique I want you to do each and every turn is to make the fence smaller if you can. That's with the rook. And if you cannot, then you move your king closer. So very simple. If your rook can make the fence smaller, do it. If not, move your king closer. I should mention that there are 2 different techniques to this checkmate, but in my vast experience, I've gone to many universes, and I've decided that this is the simpler one for kids to learn. If you were taught a different technique and you've nailed it, go with it. But for most kids, you're going to want to follow Fun Master Mike's advice. Okay, so let's go back. We're going to move the rook 1 square. Remember, that was option number 1. And yeah, the fence got a little bit smaller because now the king is restricted to the F file. He can never walk to the G file again. And if the king walks, guess what? They can make the fence smaller yet again. Our rook can move to F4, and you can see how it's shrinking. It won't be very fast, but we are getting the job done. Now, let's have the black king move again. Here we have a problem. If we move our rook 1 more square to make the fence smaller, our rook's going to get captured. Also, if we move the rook up the chessboard, that's a check, and we're not really given check in this endgame until the very end. Now the king will move down, and we have ourselves a fence with nothing inside it. Yeah, the dog got out again. We've got to spend our whole afternoon chasing Spot. We're not going to chase Spot. Instead, we're going to follow my technique. If you cannot make the fence smaller with the rook, what do? We move the king, so the king gets closer. Now, if the black king goes to the right, we again cannot make the fence smaller. We go up 1, our rook gets captured. If we give a check, then the king moves to the right, and he got out of our box. So let's go back. We're going to move our king instead. There we go. Okay. Now let's have the black king go up the board. Once again, option number 1 is always the rook, but we don't give check because the king will escape to the right. And we don't go up 1 because we'll get captured. So this is yet another time that we're going to move our king. Now when the black king goes to the left, we can once again make the fence smaller, just 1 square. Don't give check because the king will escape to c5. So let's stop on f5. Now, if the king goes to the right, we have a bit of a tricky position. We don't give check because we never give check in this endgame. We'll just get captured. And if we give check this way, well, once again, that's a check, and the king will escape to the right. So what we're going to do is move the king. But wait a minute. If we move the king anywhere on the board, we're going to lose our rook. This is actually just a waiting move. We have to go to the square f4. It's our only move. It just wastes some time to make black move, then we can continue our pattern. So the king moves, and we make the fence smaller. The king moves here. I don't see a way to make the fence smaller. Let's move our king closer. King moves here. Once again, we don't want to go there. We'll lose our rook. We don't want to give a check. So let's move our king closer. The king moves back, and now our rook can make the fence smaller. The king moves here. Ooh, look at that. Our rook can make the fence smaller again. Now it's a super skinny fence. This is the entire area that the black king can move around for the rest of the game. In fact, he only has 1 move, and now our king moves closer. Let's get our king here. By the way, king f7 doesn't really get our king closer, so king e6 is the better spot. Black king moves to the right. I see no way to make the fence smaller. We're going to move our king closer. King moves over. We actually can use our rook here. King moves over. Ooh, let's squeeze that fence a little bit smaller. Once again, we're making sure to give that black king at least 1 square every turn. We don't want any stalemate. So king moves here. Our king moves closer. King moves here. Our king moves closer. King moves here. We make the box smaller. No, we don't. That was a trick question. If we play rook to b7, that would be stalemate. So only in this position can we start thinking about checkmates. Let's see if you can find it. Well, I already told you it's not rook b7. That'd be stalemate. Rook a7, that's just check. The king escapes. Rook c8 is the winning move. And finally, we are triumphant over that very pesky black king. I should mention that sometimes you're going to do everything I tell you to, and you're actually going to get into this position, but it's going to be black's move. And what's going to happen then? That requires a little bit of a special explanation. The black king can move to the right. Now here we've got a bit of a problem. If we give check, the king escapes. Don't want to do that. If we give check here, we lose our rook. Don't want to do that. So you might think, well, Funmaster Mike, you told me to move my king. All right, well, if we move our king here, which is the only move that defends our rook, then the king moves back, and we have a bit of a problem. We can't play rook b7. That would be stalemate. And if we move our king closer, as I've taught you to do, then the king moves back. We've actually made no progress. So sometimes you'll do everything I tell you to, and you'll get in this position, but it will be white's move. And here, we need another waiting move. We basically need a move that does nothing but forces the black king to the corner so we can play our standard checkmate that we just looked at. And it turns out you actually have 6 different options. Yeah, it's quite amazing. We simply need the king to not go to c8, and then he'll have to go to the square a8. So we're going to move our rook, but we're not going to go to the right. If we go to the right, the king escapes. We're going to move our rook down, and you can play rook c6, or rook c5, or rook c4, or rook c3, or rook c2, or rook c1. Any one of those moves actually gets the job done. I know it looks super crazy to go all the way to c1. It looks like you're making the fence bigger, but actually you're not, because the black king is still restricted by your king. He still has to go to the corner, and then our rook travels all the way back to the square c8, and we have our standard checkmate. It's not actually required that you go so far. In the interest of time, if you had 1 second left on your clock, you might want to stop on c6. And then when the king moves, you go back to c8. There you go. You've saved a little bit of time, even though I just spent 30 extra seconds explaining it. But that is the checkmate technique that you need to know. All right, got a couple of fun examples to end our video. These are a little bit of exceptions to the rules because we've been learning the basic technique all video. Let's talk about some advanced techniques, okay? Only want you to do this once you've practiced the basics in the ChessKid workouts section. Here, it's white to move. Now, using the technique that I've pretty much been teaching you, you might think that rook to g7 is a great starting move because when the rook moves to g7, we have a super skinny fence and that black king is restricted to the 8th ranked for the rest of the game. And if he moves, you can actually make the fence super small and get going with your technique. And that's true. But again, what if you only had like 1 second on your clock and you needed to know an advanced technique in order to be able to get the checkmate done? Well, here we go. You came to the right place. When the two kings are lined up, checkmates are suddenly possible. So you might think, hey, king to d6, the two kings are lined up, and on the next move, rook to g8 is actually checkmate. And that's true. The problem is the kings aren't going to be lined up forever. Nothing in life stays still. The king will simply run away. And now if you chase him again, he'll run away again, and it's just not working. What we need to do is we need to force the black king to align with our king, and that means taking away the ability for the king to get to the c-file. So the super duper advanced grandmaster technique is rook to c2. Once again, not a check. But what does the rook do? The rook teams up with the white king to make sure the black king can't go here, or here, or even here. So sometimes when you want the enemy to go one place, you simply stop him from going the other place. And this enemy king has to go to the square e8. But now the kings are aligned, and we don't even need for the black king to get to the corner because rook to c8 is a bit of an advanced checkmate. Now, use what you just learned for our final puzzle of the day. This one is actually not brought to you by me. Oh no, it's brought to you by a much more famous chess teacher. Maybe not famous to you, but famous in the chess world. It is Bruce Pandolfini. He's sort of the godfather of chess teachers. He's the one that made my job possible because he showed the world that you could make a living by teaching chess. He is a good friend, and this is his puzzle. Okay, this is white to move. Bruce, or as he's sometimes known on ChessKid, Professor Pando, wants us to checkmate in 3 moves for white. Now's a good time to actually pause your video and see if you can come up with the solution. If you're back, I hope you were sitting on your hands. Professor Pando has told you that, well, it's actually a little bit of a trick position. What do I mean by that? Chess kids, if any of you picked any rook move, you were right. That's right. Any rook move is actually a correct answer. It matters not which one you pick. Even if you pick rook to e4, which looks like it does nothing. Because now the black king has to move, and here's what we're going to do. We're going to force the black king back in front of our king by taking away the ability to go left. Can't go left, must go right, and then we play a very similar checkmate to what we just learned. Let's back up though. What if instead the king moves to the right? Well, now we're going to move our rook to g4, stopping his ability to go further, and then the king has to go back, and we have ourselves another very pleasing checkmate. Our white king actually never moves in the answer to this puzzle. Let's go back and take a look at a different starting move. What if you had chosen d5? Well, that already forces the king to go to the right, and then we switch gears and bring the rook back to the right, force the king back left, and then we give him a checkmate on the next square. And even if you pick some super crazy starting move, let's say you pick the move rook to a5, it actually still works, because when the king goes to the square f8, you can come all the way back to g5 and then give a checkmate. And also, if we go back, if the king had gone to the square d8, you could then move your rook to c5, and the king must go back and a checkmate. So, any rook move to start wins the game. Just never touch your king to be able to solve this puzzle. Those were some advanced techniques. Chess kids, I hope you are now very confident to win in the endgame when you've got a queen and a rook, or 2 rooks, or just a queen, or just a rook. Coming up soon, we're going to add some more advanced endgame techniques. Remember, you drive for show, but you endgame for dough.